Welcome to the port forwarding guide for your Foscam FI9-821W wireless IP camera. This is going to be the third video in our series on how to set up a camera from scratch to view it over the internet remotely from anywhere in the world. So in this part, what we're going to be doing is setting up port forwarding, and port forwarding allows you to set up a device over the internet that's accessible to anyone who's on the internet. And that's actually the real magic behind Foscam, is that, or any other IP-based cameras, is that when you set up a camera or a device to be accessible over the internet, you're forwarding a port in your router to allow traffic from that specific device to anyone who's connected to the internet. So obviously when you put a camera like that up to the internet, out to the internet, you're able to see it from anywhere, as long as you have the IP address and port number for your specific camera. So in this video I'm going to be showing you how to do that on a Mac, as well as on a Airport Express, which is an Apple-based router. It should also work on other Apple-based routers, I believe, like Airport Extreme and also Time Capsule. So let's get into it. I have IP camera tool opened up right here, and you can see the camera is at that same IP address I had in the last two videos. I actually set up a static IP address in the first video, and that was basically when I right-clicked over here, went to network configuration, and I edited, maybe I didn't edit this specific IP address, but I changed, these fields over here to the corresponding data in the network configuration window on my Mac. And I set a static IP address, and so whenever you want to set a static IP address, you can follow the steps in that first video. For example, maybe I wanted to change my IP address to 10.0.1.4, and I always wanted it to be on this specific IP address whenever it reboots or it restarts, or maybe the power fluctuates at the place where the camera is connected to and it comes back online. But if you have it set, maybe for example set to getting an IP from the DHCP server, that actually assigns an IP address automatically. So if the camera reboots for an instance, or for some reason, the camera might actually come up on a different IP address altogether. So it'll come up maybe not on 10.0.1.2, it could be 10.0.1.4 or .5 or .6. And the reason that's not so good is because when that happens and you have port forwarding set up for this specific IP address, if this IP address changes, then your port forwarding isn't going to work anymore, and you're not going to be able to see your camera remotely. So let's say you go on vacation for a month and you forget to set up a static IP address. Well, maybe the power goes out at maybe your home where the camera is set up, and the IP address changes, and then you're not there to fix it. Then you're not going to be able to access your camera anymore, and that's not such a good thing. So you want to make sure that you have a static IP address set up here, and whenever you decide on a static IP address, let's say I had 0.2 here, and I set up everything correctly according to the first video, I just push OK, the camera resets itself, it reboots, and then it'll come up with this specific IP address every time. So even in this video, it's come up on the same IP address, 10.0.1.2, and the port at 88. And you'll see that this is a local IP address. This is what the router is assigning. It's the local devices that are connected to it. I'm going to be getting into a public IP address or external IP address a little later on in a few minutes, and I'll explain the difference between the two at that time. So what we want to do right now is go ahead and open up the camera in Safari, and we get to the login page, and you'll see this media port right here, and I said I would explain this in this specific video. The media port is actually new to the newer line of Foscam cameras, especially for now, in these specific newer HD models. Media port might or might not exist maybe later on as the firmware becomes more updated and more advanced. But what media port does currently is it's a separate port, separate from the HTTP port, which you can see up here at 88. It's separate from that in the sense that the media port actually is responsible for a lot of the video protocols that happen in browsers such as Safari and Chrome and Firefox, and also in Internet Explorer. So for example, when you log in, you're able to see the video, the live video here. You know, doing all of these things like different cameras, like 4 cameras in one screen or 9 cameras in one screen. Down here, if you do, you know, audio or recording or snapshots, if you're familiar with the older Foscam cameras like the 910 or 918 or 904, you weren't able to do most of these things in Safari or in Chrome or in Firefox. But now, because of the media port, you're able to do this remotely. You know, whether it's audio or recording or any of these things, you're able to do everything. The camera has full functionality in terms of what it can do now. So that's the great thing about media ports. So we just have to remember that there's an extra step when it comes to the media port. And you see here I clicked on settings at the top, and I'm going to network, and I'm going to go to port. And the media port is actually another port that we have to port forward in our router. So if you're familiar with port forwarding in the 910 or 918s, you remember we only had to port forward one port. So the only extra step we have to do with the newer cameras, the new HD cameras, is just port forward the second port right here, which is the media port. And this will allow us to connect remotely to our camera. For example, if you only port forwarded this one port, this HTTP port, and you didn't port forward the media port, you actually won't be able to log into the camera remotely. You might be able to get to the login screen, but you can't log in directly into the camera fully. And so what I'm going to do now is show you how to port forward this. Just a reminder, usually it's better to change your HTTP port to something in the 4 digits, maybe like 9876 or whatever it is. But for this video, I just want to leave everything at default so you can see how everything works. And then you can change it later on because you'll be familiar with the concepts already. So we know that our 2 ports are at 88 and 888. So what we're going to do is open up a tool in Mac called Airport Utility, and you can find that by either searching for it or going into your applications folder, going to the utilities folder, and I opened it up here in Finder, and going to Airport Utility right here, and you can open it up from here, or for example you can open it up by searching for it over here. So if you typed in Airport Utility, it'll come up as the first one. And Airport Utility, I'm actually on the latest firmware of it, and I also have the latest firmware installed on my Airport Express here. And Airport Utility basically allows you to do and see a lot of information about your router. It's basically the hub for checking out your router configuration if you're having any errors or anything like that. But it's also the hub for doing port forwarding. This is where you're going to do your port forwarding for Apple-based routers. If you have a regular router, maybe like a Linksys router or a D-Link router or a Belkin router, you're actually going to need to go to that router's IP address. And the way you find that out is if you're on IP Camera Tool, if you highlight the camera, right-click over here and go to Network Configuration, you'll see that the gateway IP address that we had set up before, this is actually your router IP address. So if you have a Linksys router, for example, it's not going to be 10.0.1.1. It'll probably be 192.168.1.1. And the way you access that is you go into the browser and you want to open up in another, for example, another tab, 192.168.1.1. And that would open up a router. And you can see actually here, I've connected to it on our network. You can see the Cisco logo right there next to the IP address. That's basically for Linksys. It really depends on what router you have, but that's how you're going to do port forwarding in those routers, and we do have guides on how to do that on our website. So let's go back to Airport Utility. This is for Airport Express. We want to open this up. We click on it, and we click on Edit. Okay. And when you click on Edit, you have a few tabs up here. What we want to go to is Network. And over here on Network, you'll see a few different fields, and you'll see port settings. And this is where we want to add our port numbers to the router, so we know that the router is configured properly to those ports. And so again, just to double check, our ports are going to be 88 and 888, and you can find that out again by going to the port section in your camera interface. You can see these two ports, and so we have to make separate rules for both of these ports. So the way you do this is you add a rule by clicking this plus button, and you can put a description. Maybe we can put Foscam 1 for your first camera, and you can put HTTP, and so you know this is for the HTTP port for your camera. So we're going to put in 88 for all of these port fields that you see: public UDP, public TCP, we're going to put 88, private UDP and private TCP, we're going to put 88. And you need to change this IP address to what the camera is currently at locally, what the local IP address is, and you can see that in IP Camera Tool. You see, remember, we set up 10.0.1.2. We're setting up the same thing here. And remember, I said that you have to have a static IP address, otherwise if this changes, for example, to 10.0.1.3, then your port forwarding rule is set to 10.0.1.2, and then if that happens, your port forwarding is not going to work anymore. So you need to make sure that this local IP address is going to be the same all the time, meaning it's a static IP. And that's basically it. We just set that up, so we're going to save that, and now we need to add our media port. And so we're going to add another one, and we're going to put Foscam 1 media, for example. And so now we know that this is the media port. And so we're going to put in the media port number, which is 888 for our camera. And remember, when you're adding multiple cameras, you need to make sure that you have separate ports for each camera. So if I was setting up a second camera, for example, I would set the HTTP port to something else besides 88, and the media port to something else besides 888 or 888. So for example, I could do like 889 for my second camera. But for now, I'm only setting up one camera, so let's keep it at 888, and that's what it is right now. And the IP address is going to be the same as 10.0.1.2, because that's the camera that we're port forwarding. So we're going to save that. And you can see we have our two rules now, our two port rules. And that's basically all we need to do, and all we have to do now is update. So let me go ahead and close IP Camera Tool. And I can also close the browser. And let's click Update. And it's going to tell you the device and its network settings or services are going to be unavailable because it basically reboots the router. So we're going to continue. And it's going to update the router with those port numbers for port forwarding. So your router is going to reboot. Maybe it takes about 15-20 seconds or so. You can see on the airport utility it says updating over here, and the light actually turns orange. And you'll know when it comes back up because it'll turn green. So we're just going to wait for that. Should be a couple more seconds. And usually the first light that comes back on green is the internet light, and then the router light will come back on green. Sometimes this might take a little longer, you never know. It really depends on the router. But there you go. Actually, so the router turned green, and now it's going to connect to the internet, and there you go. So now we have internet connection, and you can obviously check that by just opening up Safari if you want. And you can see I'm connected to the internet. And so now what we want to do is make sure that your camera is also connected currently, because your router did reboot. So you need to make sure that your camera is coming up in your IP Camera Tools. And it's there, it's connected, that's good. So now what we can do is we can test to see if the camera can be seen remotely from anywhere. So what we need to do now is, over here, we need to go to a website that shows us what our external IP address is. So you can actually do this by typing in, myipaddress.com, and this website will show you what your IP address is, your public IP address, and this differs from your local IP address because your public IP address is the one that's showing to the rest of the internet. Anyone who's connected to the internet, this actually identifies you on the internet as a specific network. This is your network on the entire vast web of the internet. So this is what you're going to be using whenever you're connected to the internet from anywhere else to see your camera. Currently, you've only been using your local IP address, which is this, 10.0.1.2. This is the address you use whenever you're connected to your router directly, whether you're at home or your router is set up maybe in your small business or in your office. As long as you're in that vicinity, if you're connected to that specific router, like I am right now, if I'm connected to Foscam's Wi-Fi network, I use this IP address to connect to the camera. But, for example, if I change my IP address, or if I change networks, for example, if I'm on a different network, I'm going to be using this IP address and the port to connect to the camera. So what I'm going to do is highlight this, and I'm going to copy it, and I can open up a new tab, and I can put this in, and then put the colon and 88 at the end, and that's the HTTP port. That's what you're going to use to connect to your camera. And if I push enter, I should be able to connect, and there you go, and I can connect to the same camera, and this is the same camera that is in IP Camera Tool. You'll see if I try to open it up, it's another tab. Same thing, if I log in here, this is me seeing it locally. Then I can also log in from that public IP address, and I can also see it locally. And that means that port forwarding is working. You're able to connect to the camera, and you're able to log in and see the video. And another way to basically test to see if this is working properly is to make sure that your ports are the same. So you want to make sure that your HTTP port, your media port are 88 and 888, and you did that in Airport Utility. You can go to Airport Utility, you can click here, go to Edit, and just make sure you have your ports set up correctly. In case you weren't able to connect to your camera, make sure everything is set up. So we have the media port there, and we also have the HTTP port. And make sure if you ever change your ports, you need to make sure you change them on your router too, in that Airport Utility. So for example, if I wanted to do like 4 8s, 8888 for the HTTP port, and I save that, I need to make sure I go into Airport Utility and change that for the HTTP rule. So one other way to test this is by maybe going on a different network. If you have another network available, you can do that. So why don't I get out of IP Camera Tool, and I can change to one of our networks here in the office. Maybe I can go on, for example, Foscam 1, and I can connect to that. And let's see, this is, so if, for example, let me copy this, and if I show you what my IP address is now, it's going to be changed, myipaddress.com. This is different from what I had before, which is 99.115.182.139. But if you see over here, that's actually not the case with this network. This network is Foscam 1. It's not Foscam's Wi-Fi network, which I was connected to before. So it has a different IP address. But we should still be able to connect to our camera. So if I paste that IP address that I had before and I put :88, I can still connect. And that's the great thing, is I'm able to see my camera using any network wherever I am, no matter what. And I can log in, and I can view the video feed wherever I am. If I go on vacation, if I'm away from home, if I'm at work, I'm able to do that, and I can do it in Safari in just a regular browser. I don't have to install any software on my computer wherever I'm going. I just put it in. As long as I'm connected to the internet, I can put in this IP address, the colon, and the port, and that's about it. And I push enter, and I can log into my camera and view it from anywhere. So make sure that you write down this IP address somewhere, your public IP address. Once again, the way you do that is, let me go back to the network that we set up the camera on. You can go to myipaddress.com, and it'll state it here. Or you can even go sometimes to Google, and you can type in my IP address, and Google will tell you right here your public IP address is this. So there's a lot of different ways you can view it. You can go to whatismyipaddress.com, myipaddress.com, whatismyip.com, a lot of different places. So that basically concludes the port forwarding guide. So you should be able to see your camera over the internet now using that IP address and port. Make sure that you have the media port forwarded, because if you don't have it forwarded, what's going to happen is if you try to log in, it's going to keep circling with the loading symbol over here, and it's never going to let you log in. So you need to make sure you have both ports forwarded in your router. Okay? And now what you can do is you can even go on your phone and download an app and set up the camera in there using that same IP address and port with your username and password. Make sure you definitely change your password by logging in and going to the settings and changing that so that it's secure. And you should be able to see your camera on your phone using an app. Like on iPhone you can use LiveCams Pro or IPCam Viewer Pro, or on Android you can use TinyCam Monitor or IPCam Viewer Pro as well on Android. So that completes the series on how to set up your camera from scratch and to view it remotely. So if you have any questions, you can always email us at support@foscam.us or give us a call on our main number at the foscam.us website up at the top of the page. And we'll see you next time.